My name is Ben Anderson, and this is my story. I remember as a boy growing up in the Midwest, I experienced God from as early as I can remember in primarily two ways. One was in the great outdoors, growing up in farm country and loving to be in the woods and the fields and on the water as much as I could. I experienced God so powerfully when I was a boy in the beautiful sunsets. Our farm, the driveway faced west, and so every night after school I made sure I was out there to watch the sun go down. And by the time I was 7 years old, I knew that there were no two sunsets that were alike, and God was so present and so real to me when I would see the beauty of His handiwork painted across the skies. The other way I experienced God early on was through music. I was raised in the church, and my parents and my family were very much involved, and especially in music in all sorts of ways. And so as a singer, as a musician, that was a way that I encountered God and experienced some powerful moments in the life of the church, in worship, all throughout my childhood. And so as I grew, these things would remain so important to me, and life would go on as it does for us. And music, though, would become something, it'd be more of not just a way I would experience God or worship. It became my passion, it became my pursuit, it became what led me to Tennessee. It became not just a career and a way that I would make a living, but over the years it became even more than that. It became an obsession. It became, for lack of a better term, an idol in my life. My relationships suffered because of it, and I justified it in the name of my career, in the name of success, in the name of trying to be excellent at what I did. And so over the years, even though I would know some success with the groups I was a part of and in the country music industry, even though the world would say we were successful in certain ways, inside I was becoming more and more like everyone who worships an idol of any kind. As the scriptures tell us, I was dead. Spiritually, I was dead, and I worked harder, and I applied myself more, and I just tried to do whatever I could to try to find that contentment, that fulfillment. And even though we were making more money, even though we were having more success, that was not coming. And so I turned to other things to medicate my pain, and it cost me dearly in certainly my relationship with God, but in my relationship with my wife and my relationships with my family. And I became a very different person, a very different man, to the point where not only could those who were closest to me not recognize me any longer, I too couldn't recognize who I was when I looked in the mirror. And so I remember very vividly, I was in my late 20s, and we were playing the country band I was a part of at the time. We were on a stage in San Antonio, Texas, and I remember it was the last set of the night, and I had something like a vision, and it was looking out over this vast crowd and realizing that no matter what would come of this, no matter how much money we made, no matter how successful we might become, this was always going to be making music and being the soundtrack for people hooking up and getting hammered. And I remember thinking, is this really what it's become? Is this all there is, only just on a bigger scale? And I remember standing there behind that microphone, my guitar strapped to my chest, and something inside me died. A dream that had become twisted and warped, died. And the hardest part of that was that now my identity, as I had constructed it, died as well. And I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And even though I was desperate to hear the voice of God, I'd walked away from Him in so many ways. And yet when I cried out to Him and I said, what am I supposed to do? And I heard Him say, put it down and walk away. And I was so terrified. And I asked Him, and then what? And I couldn't hear anything. And so I fought that for the next year, and I kept playing, and I became more and more miserable, and all I would hear was put it down, put it down. And I couldn't put it down because it's who I was. And so finally, after a year of greater despair and greater pain and becoming even more the man I never thought I could become in the worst way, I knew that it was either trust Him and put it down, not knowing anything beyond that action. It was either that or die. And so I did. In the time that would come after that, it wasn't immediate, but God would send people who would love me, who would encourage me. God would show me more grace in and through the person of my wife than any human being could ever deserve, and healing would begin. And it would be through His church again. His church that had loved me and affirmed me as a boy would love me and affirm me then as a 30-year-old man, and help me rebuild my identity, not as a musician or not as anything that I did, but instead who I was, as a son of God. And that would come, and the music that I had put down would no longer be something that I had to control and that I used for security or identity or affirmation. It would become something that could be offered back to God in joy again, as a gift that's given and meant to be returned to Him. And that is what He did. He picked me up out of that pit of my despair and my sin and my selfishness. And as the psalmist says in Psalm 18, He put me on a broad place, and He set my feet on solid ground. And I can just remember, it's like the broad Iowa prairie when I would stand at the end of our driveway and watch that sunset night after night after night. Now it wasn't in that setting, but God had put me in the broad space of His own embrace. And it was in Him, it was in Jesus Christ, that now I could learn what it really meant to be who I was. It wasn't what I did, it was who I was, who I am in Him. And He saved me. I thank God that my story is just a part of His story, that His salvation, His reaching down and picking me up, putting me on the broad place, is how my story ties into His story. And I thank God for the blessing it is to be able to share that today.